No,
No, I
that's
heard it again. Anyway. Okay, we're off.
cool. So that's one. Good to see you, Peter. We will be ready to go shortly.
YouTube's working.
Oh, great. Good. Alrighty. 1 minute to go, and we're recording here, and I'm getting good bounce. Can you tell me what you had for breakfast, Peter, so I can just check that
A very
level?
nice sourdough, Bernard.
Oh, lovely. Toasted?
Yes,
Oh,
with
mum.
Pix peanut butter on it, of course.
Oh, I'm a
That stuff from
marmalade
Nelson's
guy.
bloody good. Well, I have a fantastic marmalade too, but I'm part of my family comes from Nelson, so you've got to eat
Ah,
Pix.
Pix. Yeah, yeah. Okay.
I'm sure they grow the peanuts there too. I don't
Yeah.
think so, actually.
Aye. Okay. Five, four, three, two, one. Tēnā koutou katoa, everyone. It's great to see Peter Bale, co-host of The Hoon, here for another Friday evening chat session.
Well, as usual, Bernard, you either look like you're transmitting from your broadcasting from your cell in Paramaribo, or you're hiding in Kafia with this guy who's gone missing with his three children. We
Yeah.
need to get you. We need to get you a slightly better backdrop, I think. Along with like mine, the I blame the internet picture from
Yes,
England. But
yes. You're probably right. There needs to be some sort of, backdrop of high-rise office blocks or
or our own high rise real estate portfolio, since it's the only thing worth investing in.
yeah,
Not to get you into housing
that's
already.
true. Yeah, it's the land that really makes the money.
That's
So
right.
yeah, no, no, a picture of some grass, maybe looking out over the sea. That would be good.
Oh, I can do the looking out over the sea. All right. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Next week I'll come with the view out from my
yeah.
deck, if
Now,
you like.
now that we're
That's deck
past
since you're working in Australia. That's deck,
deck,
DECK.
yeah, yeah,
Yep.
and now that we're past the winter solstice, the sun will be staying up for longer,
Jesus,
which I'm.
I made an appointment with somebody today to see them on September the 1st, and they said, "Oh, that's the first day of spring." And I thought, Jesus, thank God for that.
Yeah,
This has been a very difficult winter for me.
it's long, isn't it? And it's been 7 months of rain, and hopefully El Nino comes quick, and it
Oh, yeah,
means
hopefully you'll Yeah, yeah. Oh, we're moving straight into climate.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I could do with a bit of sun, and I think a lot of us could. It's been a long winter, and in all sorts of ways, it's starting to show. Just watching Parliament, there's a lot of grumpy people around, and
Oh,
the
grumpy people
elections.
in Parliament. Jesus.
Yeah,
Even
and
with
the
Trevor Mallard gone to Ireland.
wow, that's the thing. Yeah, and we're not far away from the election now. It's 57 days before people can start voting overseas,
Yeah.
and a little bit longer before people can start voting ahead of time. So it's we better get all these policies out before people start voting.
Yeah, but I mean, we're going to be discussing some quite significant policies tonight, like a defence policy, which we'll talk about a bit later.
Yes, yes,
And one of the things that I was thinking about with that was that this may well not be the party or the government that is implementing that. And one of the things we could look at when we get Prof Patman on is to discuss whether the New Zealand defence policy will change under Jerry Brownlee and whoever is the defence spokesman. Is it still Penny Henare? No, hang on, no.
I,
God, wrong party. Who is the National Defence spokesman?
that is a very good question.
Exactly. Yeah,
I
National
think it,
doesn't even have one. It'll be an ACT person probably.
yeah, yeah. No, that's something I'll have to Google at some
Yeah.
at some point.
Excuse me, you're supposed to be the political journalist here.
Yeah, no, no, it'll be on my list somewhere, amongst my stack of papers. So
Yeah.
that will be good to see. And we've got Josie Pagani coming on towards the end of the show to talk about what's happening in politics and also policies, because of course with the new Hoon, with the solutions journalism Hoon, we
Well, the
are.
attempt to do it. Yeah,
Yes,
I don't
yes.
think you should hold yourself to that too hard. But I did remind you of that in our people won't imagine that we actually have a pre-conversation because it's usually so bloody haphazard. But I think it is important not to get into the who will Winston turn to and who will. I thought it was very interesting listening to Winston this morning, who you know, I, I can't remember that I can't really believe that I covered his entry into Parliament with two other idiots who aren't there anymore, but who uh, who he's the great survivor. But his thing this morning about mainstream media has discounted us. Christ, he's like Nigel Farage. He uses mainstream media as his main instrument.
That's
He can
right.
hardly complain about as there used to be a thing in Westminster that they'd say that politicians complaining about the media is like a fisherman complaining about the sea.
Yeah, no, there's an element of that. And Winston has this weird sort of double act going on where he's all matey before the camera
Yeah,
red. And then he's, bloody media, they're useless and
yeah, but I
you
think
can't
what he's
trust them.
tapping into, because he is also irritatingly astute, and what he's tapping into is quite a substantial
Yeah, but it
dislike
doesn't,
of the media,
this is the
including
thing.
amongst my brother, who we haven't talked about for quite
No.
some months.
But
But
the thing is, people who thought the media was corrupt and in the pockets of someone else actually saw how he dealt with media and all other politicians. He is the ultimate insider. So this whole
yes,
shtick
exactly.
of we are, I'm here for the people. I'm not part of the Wellington establishment. Crimea River. It's just not true. But yeah, it's hopefully we won't go too deep into the this ruling in, ruling out.
Yeah, no, I think
Kind of
it's
thing.
much more. I think it'd be much more interesting. And let's do it. We'll look at a little bit at Ukraine, and we're going to talk to Catherine in a minute when she's turned off or closed her other Riverside apps, which would be good if you did. Please, Catherine. Thanks, according to Simon, our producer.
Who will cut this out in post?
Just keep one open. Um,
I can't
you know,
find
we'll
any.
talk about we'll
I
talk
know.
about the Sawalki Gap, and I did find a little bit of a sort of skateboarding dog for the end.
Ah, great. But we always start off these days with the latest on the climate because it's like watching a a car crash of the planet. It's just something I cannot take my eyes off. Every morning I get up and I look at the latest charts and the latest records that come out from the climate. And
Yeah.
Catherine is doing a great job of keeping an eye on those as well. Can you tell us, what are some of the records we've seen this week?
Yeah, it's been another startling week for climate. So um, there was a recently came out today, I think, that the month of July in total, global surface temperatures reached above 1.5 degrees Celsius versus pre-industrial era. So
Wow. So we're there.
that's the first full month where we've been there. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, obviously, as far as the Paris Agreement is concerned, they're interested in the long-term trend, and this is a 1 month figure, so that doesn't kind of breach that level, but it's still pretty.
Yeah.
It's a
And if
biggie.
you
It's a
and for
bit
those
weak, isn't it?
and for those people who see the chart, and my idea of a fun time is looking at the chart, which you can lie with statistics and charts too, but it's pretty brutal when you see we're on a line, and then in July of 2023 is boom, and the scale of the difference away from the norm, so to speak, is really something. Could you tell us about some of these numbers we're seeing in parts of the world?
Well, South America in particular, they've been seeing temperatures 10 to 20 degrees Celsius above normal.
Yeah,
Which is
there's no winter this year.
It's huge, yeah. Even in the Andes region in Chile, they were seeing temperatures up to 38.9 in midwinter. They've
That's
had, yeah,
And
that's amazing.
that's with La Nina.
yeah.
La Nina, and then
Well,
we're coming into El
coming
Nino
into
as
El
well.
Nino,
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think it might be just as well for us to hunker down in New Zealand, really, and pull the duvet off over us, unless it's too hot for duvets.
Yeah, we'll have to give up our duvets and just have sheets, I think. And
No, we'll have our only hunger blankets, thank you, and our
uh,
Mosgiel blankets.
yeah, I must say it's noticeable this winter. It's been a couple of nights when I've had to have the thick blanket on, and what struck me in Greece when it was hot, but not brutally hot, was you really know when it's hot in the middle of the night, and that's something that, for example, in Phoenix, Arizona, they've just gone through July with the longest run of 110 Fahrenheit. So we're talking 35,
No,
43.
43,
43, I looked it up just before.
Double it and add
Oh,
30, yeah.
43
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
30 days in a row for a city that is a heat sink.
which is
Concrete
also the
everywhere.
fastest growing city in the United States. And
Is that
they've actually
right?
just gone back up to this kind of temperature. So they've had that break. They broke the record, but now it's back up. And you may have seen the Guardian today had a very good piece, or interesting piece, about the saguaro cactuses, the ones that look
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And some of them are dying. They're starting to die because they're running out of water. And this is a cactus, for God's sake. Now,
yeah.
Catherine, we wanted to ask you about to slot in a news item into this as well. So Rishi Sunak announced this week the release of 100 new gas and oil exploration licenses in the North Sea, and then proceeded to talk a total load of old bollocks about how it would defend the UK's energy dependence, and that they would actually save energy by not having to ship it from overseas, when of course it all goes into the bloody global energy pool and is not exactly kind of shielded off from everywhere. What did you think of that?
Well, it was a fantastical story, wasn't it? Like some good storytelling abilities there. He also talked a lot about they're putting some more investment into storage,
Yeah.
carbon capture and storage, which is another. I think there was something like 700 scientists sent a petition to the government in the UK saying, that basically there's a role for CSS, but it's not to offset continued burning of fossil fuels and keep going the way that we're going. At best, you can kind of use it for some of those hard to get rid of emissions, like from aviation, for instance. But to use it that way is just
It's really interesting. Also, and I read something about carbon capture the other day, which I think it was possibly in the New Yorker or somewhere, and it really reminded me. We've been talking, it's a little bit like some of the sort of smoking industry things about what's going to fix us. And we know the same tactics have been deployed by the fossil fuel industry. And I do think that technology will save us from this at some point. But there is a huge difference between extracting or taking the carbon dioxide from cement works and pumping it directly underground when it's high percentage, than trying to just take it out of the atmosphere, where it's a tiny percent, relatively small percentage of the atmosphere.
They haven't really kind of scaled up just how much space they've got on these underground cabins for all the stuff, because within the IPCC's integrated assessment models, they've got a huge amount of what's known as BECCS in there for the latter half of the century, which is bioenergy, carbon capture and storage.
Yeah.
So, and that's to pull. That's because we're expecting to go above 2 degrees, and we're going to have to pull, carbon out of the atmosphere in order to go back below. So we're going to have net.
Well, we might have to have slightly cooler seas and a hell of a lot more forest to do that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, A, they're going to be competing with agriculture for land to plant all these trees, and B, there's going to be a hell of a lot of competition for these underground caverns where they want to pump everything. Like none of this has been.
Oh, mind you, but
scaled
because
up
we're fracking everything to death, which we're not.
There'll be a lot of
I mean,
holes.
can I just say also, and I don't want to sound like the ACT energy spokesman, but I have been quite enthusiastic about fracking from certain points of view. Catherine, when you saw the UK launch 100 new North Sea licenses, did you wonder whether Jacinda Ardern was right to ban offshore exploration in New Zealand? Because I've always found that perplexing, given that it would probably be gas, and that gas is actually better than burning Indonesian coal at Huntly.
At some point, you have to sort of start to question whether it's possible for us to meet any of the targets we've set if we're just going to keep drilling and pulling that oil up. And yeah, I think for a lot of people, they're just kind of accepting that we're probably not going to stop until we actually run out of the stuff.
Which was pretty much what Rishi Sunak said, was just we're going to drill, baby, drill. But then on the other hand,
talk about doomism.
Yeah. But on the other hand, New Zealand does have a lot of gas, or but it's chosen to leave a lot of that gas. And isn't gas a really intelligent transition thing for New Zealand, or do we then get sucked into making the transition to seem perpetual?
I think it's less intelligent than just building more wind and renewable energy sources. Like why do you want to transition when you could just go straight to those which are cheaper than a lot of other things?
Yeah,
anyway.
but we need to be able to turn on, as you know and I know, we need to be able to turn on various sources for those dips. And at the moment,
Well,
that's the Huntley Power Station.
you can do these things with batteries, and rightly we need to
Yep.
come up with a solution to the dry year thing. And just a sneak preview of next week's When the Facts Change interview. I've spoken to...
Is this on your other podcast, Bernard?
Yeah, I shouldn't be cross-promoting
Yeah.
my podcast, but
One of your other podcasts, sorry. Yeah.
I spoke to one of New Zealand's geothermal electricity experts, and we forget 20 to 30% of our renewable electricity comes from geothermal, and we have hardly even touched the sides of, or the depths of, going to supercritical geothermal, which is where very, very, very hot steam actually is very efficient, and also they're getting much better at capturing the actual the climate emissions that come out of the ground as well. So there's other options, and particularly,
is it Contact Energy that this week put in its application to replace the power stations at Wakaraki?
yeah, and to get those consents again. So
Yeah.
and they could, because they're close to Auckland and where all the population lives, it may be a better solution to the dry year problem. And also, we're buying all these Teslas and Leafs and cars that have got batteries that at some point are not any good for a car, but they need to be pulled out of these cars and put into homes and various other places, so we can start.
Well, we can put them into your new batch in Rakino.
Yeah.
Because I discovered that the place that I was recommending to you in Rakino doesn't in fact have electricity. But Catherine, I mean, where are we going with all of this? One of the things Bernard wanted to ask you about, but I'm going to ask you instead, is the tone. Like we talked maybe 2 weeks ago about something I'd done, and which was extremely negative. Well, not negative, just to try to point out just how horrific these things are. This change is at the moment, and of course, various people I know will in 3 months say, "Oh, it's just the bloody weather." I mean, what would you like the discussion in New Zealand to be like about climate?
Well, this came up just in an article today about Jim Scare, the new IPCC head, who was talking about how plus 1.5 degrees Celsius is not existential for humanity. And that kind of looks to be part of a deliberate attempt to change the narrative around 1.5 as we're looking to sort of go right past it. They don't want people to lose hope and to despair. And so they're trying to change the narrative around that. And, my view has always been, when it comes to the serious, scarier parts of telling the story, is that people's, emotional reactions are a point in time. They're an emotional reaction today, but then people process information and they move from one place to another over time. So while they might feel despair one day, they'll feel hope the next. And that's quite normal when you talk to anybody who works.
Jesus, that sounds like are you my psychiatrist, Catherine? That sounds excellent. Thank you.
Well, when you talk to any of the climate scientists in this is what they say. They say, well, some days I get out of bed and I feel real despair about this, and other days I get out of bed and I feel very hopeful about.
And some days I get out and I go,
so,
yeah, I was right. Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
this is the thing. When you actually, and I'm on a particular strain of Twitter at the moment, where they call themselves doomsters. They call themselves, these are the doomer end of the climate spectrum. But as you say, Catherine, the research says that actually the people who are openly the most anxious, the most obviously worried, are also the ones who are doing the most to reduce their emissions. So I do wonder, this strategy of essentially trying not to scare the horses actually means the horses slowly boil to death.
Yeah.
Right.
Mix my metaphors there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, that came out of Yale Climate Communications. And I think historically a lot of the research that's been done on this sort of thing, they get people in a room and they show them a bunch of really scary headlines, and then they go, well, how does that make you feel? And people, of course, are in a bit of shock and just go, I don't feel like I can do anything, and so they read that as, people will see a scary headline and then they will despair and they won't want to take any kind of action. But
Yeah, so we need to give people positive.
moment.
We need to give people some positive things. So, Bernard will put in the show notes if we have them. Do we have show notes? We don't really, but there's the positive things to do. The 9 listed by the grant at the Imperial College starts with political action.
Yeah, but
I
it's
was wondering, Catherine, with the 2050 stuff and the 2030 and net zero. In fact, that person Bronwyn, who we had on, Bernard, is a bit of a skeptic about, not to take her thunder or misquote her, but a bit of a skeptic about some of the net zero things. But if you're Rishi Sunak and you're opening up 100 new licenses, I don't. But he knows he's not going to be the prime minister in 2050. It's just not his problem, and it's much more cynical than that. And I have a terrible feeling that all of the current generation of New Zealand politicians, I was just thinking of one exception, but I'll just remove her name from my mouth. But I just think that I'm a bit concerned that there is no deadline for them.
Actually, there's a new piece of legislation in Australia that's been put forward by
David Pocock.
David Pocock, working with a climate activist, and basically it would require politicians to consider younger generations or children when they're making these decisions.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what we need is actual
Which oddly is a really
interesting.
That actually isn't that a Te Ao Māori idea as well, that with
No doubt.
isn't there an expectation, Bernard and Catherine, that when these Maori trusts are doing investments and so on, they say they're thinking on a multi-generational basis?
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
and there is a good precedent in Aotearoa for this, with the treaty now being integrated into many new pieces of legislation across the board. And if you had one of these David Pocock style pieces of always think about the intergenerational effects before you make any decision, you'd get some different times. If you stop trusting politicians to do the right thing by everyone in the long run, maybe you need to embed something in legislation to make them
That's
do it.
very interesting. What's happened, by the way, before we get, speaking of emissions, and we get to Robert, but what's happened to the well-being agenda in New Zealand now that Jacinda's not there? Is it still there? I haven't heard much talk of it lately.
In my view, it's now descended into a well-being washing exercise. There's a lot of greenwashing around, but there's also a lot of well-being washing, and I think that I've been calling bullshit a couple of years now, because whenever you talk about well-being,
Well,
what it actually means.
Bernard.
Well, I'm having a crack. What it actually means is, if you're serious about reducing poverty, fixing housing, fixing the climate, you actually need to spend some money and invest some money and have a different tax structure and do the things that lose you votes. Otherwise, you're not being really serious. And they, to be frank, haven't been. It's bought time. It's washed away time before actually things hit the fan. And actually, at the moment, they are hitting the fan in all sorts of ways. And I'm at the point of calling bullshit on this stuff. So
Great. Let's get somebody in from. I'll dig up a group that's, because I think that's so interesting to talk about that multi-generational approach. I fear that the next government may not be quite as minded to listen to the Te Ao Māori perspective as the current one, but I think it would be really interesting to get that perspective about a multi-generational view.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Lovely to have you on again.
you.
It's great to
See
have you in here.
Thanks very much.
Nice,
See you
Mike.
later.
Cheers. Yeah, no, it's good.
Speaking
Robert,
of which,
lovely
Hello,
to
Robert,
see
you
you.
handsome
How are you?
devil, how are you?
Oh, coping well.
Oh, he's gone.
Oh, I think he might have accidentally bumped something when he was
Jesus,
coming on.
with his glass of gin and tonic. I bet.
Maybe the gin did it, but that's okay. It's been a busy old week. In fact, today, a big day with the release.
Is it a big
of-
day, Bernard? Because I think it is a big day, and I just don't see it really reflected adequately in the New Zealand media yet. That defence statement is huge by Andrew Little. The gobbledygook that he's talking in there, as we call it in journalism, gobbledygook, is pretty extraordinary. And our old friend Helen Clark called it. And what was really amusing is that Helen said, Jesus Christ, thank God we've got Robert Patman to tell us
Exactly.
to have an independent foreign policy.
Sorry, I just disappeared there.
Yeah, you did, but it's all right.
No,
But Robert,
Helen Clark has
was
brought you back
quoting
in.
you today.
Yes, I think she had problems with my name, but everybody's having a bit of a joke about that. At least she didn't call me Batman, which my students do.
We do too sometimes.
Yeah, Batman and Robin. I remember when I did my...
Yeah.
yeah, but it was interesting. I couldn't make the breakfast launch this morning. Defence Minister Andrew Little presided over three major documents. first of all, the launch of the first New Zealand's first national security strategy, which is a first, and then of course there was the defence statement, and also the design and the force design principles document. So, yeah, it was quite a big day, I guess, for people interested in security.
And do you sense any big shift inside those strategy? They're always wrapped in very. Sometimes there is movement under the surface. What did you
Yeah, I
take
mean,
from the statement?
I suppose in one sense there was a welcome recognition that New Zealand does need to do more to on defence and security. We've been, for a long time, there's been a bipartisan agreement that we should spend more than 1% of GDP. And it means often we're very limited in contributing to international arrangements for in our security interests. I think, yes, there's a recognition that we've got to become much more proactive. After he delivered his speech this morning, apparently Andrew Little said at a press briefing, he doesn't envisage defence spending reaching 2% of GDP, but somewhere between. It's around about 1% at the moment. So that was good in that sense, but I think the document's slightly disappointing in the sense that it made some good noises, but it didn't say anything about the relationship between New Zealand and AUKUS, which is an issue at the moment.
No.
And secondly, it didn't actually, say exactly what its spending commitments would be. It was very much an aspirational document. The other thing that struck me is that, and I just quote from this, we take the world as it is, not how we would like it to be.
Which suggests that we have no capacity to change it.
Yeah,
and you've been advocating the other way for a long time.
And that's linked to two key trends that all the documents were based on, and these were as follows. Firstly, there is intensification of great power rivalry. Well, great power rivalry hasn't gone away for the last 30 years. It's got more pronounced recently. The second thing is climate change. And yes, I agree that both of these factors are very relevant. What I found lacking, and this is, I thought the documents recognise, and I think it was Admiral Short who mentioned this point, that he said the international rules-based system was what guaranteed New Zealand's stability, security, and prosperity. Right, I agree with that. But the point is, surely that would have been one of the trends that New Zealand should have been including in its strategic thinking. We are not powerless on that front. And the fact of the matter is, we need to tackle international institutions which allow Russia to invade a neighbour, which allow China to basically claim 90% of the South China Sea. That's unacceptable to us, and we need to start having rules which really seriously get in the way of states which have aggressive or expansionist goals. And so I'm a bit disappointed that's not part of our strategic thinking at the moment. That's not wishy-washy. It's a reluctance to accept a status quo which is making us insecure.
Yeah, and Robert, you've been very strong, particularly in the Jacinda Ardern years, about the idea that New Zealand did have the capacity and the charisma from her and so on to find those like-minded countries. And one of the interesting reactions I've seen to the Andrew Little thing is that it might push us away further from some of the Pacific countries who want a more independent view than just being, at the mercy of a kind of US-China axis.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? One point that Helen Clark and Geoffrey Miller have highlighted, which is, I think, point 59 in the defence document, is that it alludes to the fact that we may increase cooperation in the technological area with under Pillar 2 of AUKUS. Whether that is a suggestion that we're going to move to it or not, I don't know. But I don't think we should underestimate the importance that Pacific Island states attach to our non-nuclear security commitment. Exactly. It's not a question, I don't doubt the government's being sincere when they say we're not going to do anything to compromise that. But we can't control other people's perceptions. And we were a key leader, and I think most people in this country would be pleased to know this. We were a key leader in the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons in 2022, which more than 50 states have signed up to. And we did the rounds in ASEAN and the Pacific Island states to get their support. And they got it because both ASEAN and the Pacific Island states both have both of them respectively have commitments to a non-nuclear security, and therefore are not very happy about the transfer of nuclear-powered submarines to Australia.
Yeah, so Robert, do you agree with sorry, but one of the things that I thought Helen Clark was really interesting on, and she has the historical perspective on this both from the Longy government and her own work, and I've written a little bit about this in my old North and South column, which regrettably is no more, and we've possibly talked about it here, which is the role of officials. And you do tend to get, I mean, she suggests in her tweets, which talk about you today and remind us all what a fabulous chap you are, that
No.
the government is possibly in hostage, being held hostage in a sense by New Zealand MFAT and defence officialdom, which we know is historically very close to the Americans, very influenced by the Americans, loves the Five Eyes arrangement, and that they have that sort of blob, to use an English word, has a tendency to push New Zealand towards alliance with the United States, when rather than an independent David Longy-ish kind of foreign policy.
I don't think that's fair. I think there's lots of people in Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, Defence and the Foreign Ministry. I think you have a range of views there. I don't think you should assume they all agree with each other on this. I'm just, my sense is that this is an attempt for New Zealand to up its game in the defence and national security area. It's an aspirational document. I welcome that because I don't think we've taken foreign policy and defence and security seriously enough for a long time. It's only recently that the foreign minister has been given, relieved of the local government position, and it can concentrate. And we've already seen, I think, Nanaia Mahuta's doing a really good job. But one of the reasons is because she's not being overstretched in the way she was before.
Yeah, no, I think you're right.
And I think we've got to take, for too long in this country, appointments around defence and foreign affairs have been very much driven by domestic political concerns. I think we need now to seriously, and I think it's being done, to recognise that we, amongst the developed world, depend critically on our international environment. I think it's 29% of our GDP goes in agricultural exports or something like that. And so we have a big stake in having a stable international order. At the same time, that order is not just the way it is. We need to improve it. And I that's where I'm slightly disappointed. It seems to be accepting a view of the world the way it is, but I think it should also be, for an aspirational document, what's to raise our game. I think we should not only just react to growing US-China rivalry, and also react to the looming challenge of climate change. I think we need an anticipatory dimension as well as a reactive dimension, where we try to shape, albeit we're a modest power, our international environment in a way that is going to improve life for future New Zealanders.
Okay. Well, do we have, Robert? This is slightly arcane, but it's not actually arcane because Bernard and I have talked about this. Maybe we've talked about this before, but there was a time when everybody knew who the head of MFAT was and who the head of the Defence Department was, and we used to see the Prime Minister's office, particularly under Norman Kirk, even Muldoon, probably, I'm thinking of Don McKinnon and various other. We used to see the civil servants more visibly.
Yeah.
Do we still have a Ministry of Foreign Affairs with a strong enough policy, strategic push to survive these kind of bumps of having 3-year governments which are a bit more sort of media savvy? I mean, my impression is that Macaulay really changed New Zealand foreign affairs for the worst.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, he did some good things as well. He did certainly upset MFAT because in his first year, I think he had a bit of a shakeout and about 80 very talented people left. And I think since then, to his credit, Winston Peters has rebuilt. When he was foreign minister, he put a lot more investment. I welcome the fact overall that these documents, I think, are pushing us in a direction where we're taking foreign affairs and security much more seriously. But they are aspirational. We haven't yet got firm commitments. We don't know exactly what direction we're going in. I think there is a welcome recognition since the Christchurch terror atrocity that we're not immune to what's happening in the rest of the world. And one thing that did come out of this was a real commitment to focus, in particular, our security efforts in the Pacific Islands region. And so, coming back to your point, Peter, if we're doing that, then we must listen to their concerns. Yep.
One thing that me that document and is that, and again, this is me looking at the financial aspects of things and judging that if you're really serious about it, show us the money. Because both National and Labour have made no comments really about substantially increasing the share of spending on defence. And it's relatively low compared to Australia and others, and low compared to rising spending as a share of defence. Poland, for example, more than 3% of GDP they're putting into defence.
Oh, are you doing a segue to the Sawaki Gap? Jesus, that was good. Yeah, in a minute. Yeah,
but I think, Bernard, though, to be fair, I think this may be a prelude to precisely what you're describing. That they are getting people used to the idea that we're not a long way from everywhere and relatively safe. And I think they're saying, actually, the world's a much more dangerous place than we had assumed. In the documents, they say we're no longer in a benign environment. In fact, we haven't been in a benign environment for the past 30 years, probably longer than that. So, but that was the phrase that was used up to about 2001, I think. Or maybe was it around 2001, just before 9/11, I think Helen Clark once used that phrase. But I'm not sure that's the case, and it's certainly not the case now.
And to give you an idea, Peter, the National Party's defence spokesperson, Tim Vanden Molen.
Oh yeah, Timo,
who is not even on the in the top 20 of National's list. Jesus. And I actually, there is a change of government. National's approach to defence and its approach to China will become a point of concern with our Five Eyes partners, given the sorts of comments we've seen in the last week from Christopher Luxon about welcoming in Belt and Road spending. And I'm surprised actually that we haven't seen the Labour Party, who must be getting pretty desperate now, decide to unleash on National on foreign affairs, which is not normally a election topic. But Robert, thank you very much for being with us. It's been lovely. And on that note,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're Sawaki Gap next time.
Thank you.
Well, we could do the Sawaki Gap anytime. We can do the Sawaki dance. Now, Josie, are you
Lovely
in
to see
the
you,
Koru
Josie.
Club somewhere?
No, I'm in a tiny little kind of cell in an office somewhere in central Wellington.
The sound is really good, and the backdrop is helping that, because I just wondered whether you were a member of what Bernard calls the Koru Club class that sort of run New Zealand, which of course you are.
Yeah, but I don't pay for it though. I just kind of accidentally keep getting it extended. But yeah,
of course.
That's good. I tailgate into the Koru Lounge.
Yeah.
It's great.
Or as you call it, the Kaka Lounge.
I've just listened to your stuff with Robert, and we had the first foreign affairs trade and aid debate last night with Jerry Brownlee. And the one time that I tailgated Bernard into the Koru Club was after going on Q&A and calling for Jerry Brownlee to be fired from his job. And then we went, and he said, "Would you like to come into the Koru Club?" And got me in on a free ticket, and we sat there and wine for the whole afternoon. So,
well, we should all call for more people to be.
Yeah.
That's the way to go. Lovely to see you. And we may as well jump straight into this. These comments from Christopher Luxon about roads, NZTA, and transport, because your column this week is a bracing bucket of cold water in the faces of the Green supporters who, are shocked and outraged that Christopher Luxon is saying roads should be repaired and expanded. What do you think of the National Party's approach, which is very much, as Christopher Luxon says, we want NZTA, Waka Kotahi, to prefer building roads to reducing emissions?
I think, Bernard, the answer to that question is somehow we need to get beyond the kind of tribal knee-jerk reactions on transport, because we need, a bit of everything. And the idea that we don't need to do and update our roads, which most of them date back to the 1920s, and they're hopelessly unsafe in many places. And if we want regional development in places like the East Coast or Northland, we've got to have roads so that people can live there and get out of there and work there, and businesses can set up there and so on. So I think the point I was trying to make was, and I actually did this with a friend of mine in Copenhagen in a dark and danky bar basement in a little cave, and we listed all the things that are right wing and all the things that are left wing. And it's like, right wing, roads, anything big, talkback radio, mullet haircuts, so on. And anything left wing was things like, public transport, ballet,
bicycles,
kale, bicycles, and anything small, And so somehow we've got to get out of that mentality of thinking that if you're on the left of politics, it's, public transport or nothing. And if you're on the right of politics, it's roads and trains and buses are, communist.
I'm always looking for interesting, we're always looking for interesting combinations, unlikely alliances that actually progress in politics. When you see, for example, the very far right and the very far left coming together, for example, to clamp down on forests, pine forests, or often you have this interesting alliance between conservatives on the far right who don't want development in rural areas, and then on the far left who also don't want development in rural areas.
But Josie and I, Bernard, I mean, after we had lunch the other day, and I said to you, I'm slightly nervous that I completely agree with National's road program. You said, but we need a bloody rail program. I didn't realise Josie and I were so close on so many things.
Yes.
No, but Peter, I am from the left of politics. I must have missed the memo when roads became right wing. So if you go back to, this is a point in my column, I live up in Kapiti, you go back to the launch of the building of the Centennial Highway, which is this piece of road that was built in 1939 on the coast between Wellington
in the Centennial,
in the Centennial, good, well spotted. And that was, it was launched with great nation building fanfare by Labour Minister Bob Semple under a Michael Joseph Savage government. So there was a sense of nation building, of building stuff to make us prosperous and independent and so on. So, the idea that roads have EVs have got to drive on roads, for goodness sake, So the idea that roads are not a part of that, or rather a multi-layered transport plan, is not something that we can't all get behind without, we can have politics around, where the spending goes and how much and whatever. But roads, of course, have got to be
absolutely.
Part of it. I don't know why Labour has become. I remember, before I stop ranting about this, but up in Kapiti.
No. We please go. Please keep going.
Please keep ranting.
Peter's enjoying it. Yep.
This was like, I don't know, before the 2017 election. So we had Labour MPs, local Labour MPs in Kapiti, protesting against the Kapiti Expressway. Now, even outside Parliament, there were demonstrations. Today, you would get Kapiti residents, friends of mine, you would get them protesting if we didn't extend the expressway all the way up to Levin and beyond. So, you
mean so that they can get to their batches and their farmers markets in Levin on a Saturday morning?
No, I don't mean that at all, Peter. I actually mean the opposite, because that's the thing about an idea of transport that doesn't include, unfortunately, driving cars, because we have to drive cars, is a way of excluding working class people, actually.
Exactly.
not giving working class kids the same freedom of movement that middle class kids have because they can, drive around in their Lexus EV or their Tesla.
I can see that there is I think part of the reason this has become such a divisive and hot issue is just the sheer huge numbers involved in some of the public transport projects, the light rails, the Let's Get Wellington Movings. We're talking 10, 20 billion at a time and, 10 years before anything happens. And I can see why a lot of people, just from a, how dare they spend my money on that point of view, are grumpy. And this is where I think there's a way through, which is for the, fiscal conservatives to get together with the green side of politics, which is actually anti very heavy rail and very big, tunnels, and actually starts to use some of the roads to share them with public transport and cycling.
Have these
and
guys
walking.
heard about containerisation, Bernard? For God's sake,
because
you've got to have big tunnels to move bloody containers from Auckland to Wellington or from Whangarei to Auckland.
Well, this is where the Greenies would say yes, expand and improve your rail line so you can take it off the roads.
Sure, but in the meantime, Main Freight is going to be delivering it all. If you drive down the desert road, it is completely ludicrous that cars should have to, and bicycles should have to share that highway with 400 million trucks going to and fro.
Just take the trucks off and the cars off and leave it to the cyclists.
To a certain extent, Bernard, but then
delivering kale to food to New World?
Well, there's some very good electric bikes that have
kale's definitely
But Josie, how do we solve this? Because Bernard's talking about a kind of nirvana here. It's got to be a transition. It's going to be expensive to do all this stuff. I love what you just said about it.
I'm saying it should be cheap and fast. But
it can't be. But I love what you said about a national mission, Josie. That the Kapiti thing was done. The T-rail, the spiral, and all of these things that we used to be proud of. Can't we just blast through a couple of TGVs between here and Auckland to take all the pressure?
Yeah, and Bernard's right though that you do need to go. You need to push back on the right as well and go that if we had more frequent, more regular, more reliable trains and buses. You can do that. You can do that, especially in the cities. We can get better at what we've already got without being overly ambitious. Without going, let's spend, what is it now, $28 billion on a Auckland light rail. That's just a ludicrous amount of money. It's not going to happen because it's too much money. Yeah. So what we can do is get much better, as you say, Bernard, of just getting the buses to and from the airport, getting what we've got working better.
And faster.
Public transport and faster, and also realizing that we need roads, right? We need better roads.
Because it's really interesting. I'm actually of the view now that these huge rail projects are politically impossible to sustain. And also, when you do the carbon accounting on them, because of the huge holes that are dug, the embedded carbon in the steel and the concrete, you actually don't start reducing emissions because of these railways for another 15 years, and that's too long. We're
exactly.
Talking about,
so let's build some decent roads, and we'll get the new Tesla trucks for Main Freight, and Main Freight can have those, ethical signs on the back of their trucks, and it'll be fine.
And you can put tow bars on the electric bikes. You can do some great things.
We can look at it through the lens of carbon.
You're being silly
emissions.
now.
You're right, and we can look at it. But what I'm also challenging people to do is look at it through the lens of regional development. And we've talked about regional development for decades, and bits of it have been done. And then you go up north, you go to there's nothing happening there that's hopeful and giving opportunities to people there. So you've got to look at how it is we're going to grow the regions. You're not going to suddenly have 24-hour bus services in the regions. It's just not going to happen. So in the meantime, we've got to upgrade those roads and put big roads going through.
Yeah, the good thing, Josie, is that we might have New Zealand First in, and we'll have a regional development fund of several $1 billion. And a couple of lunatics to spend it. Bernard wants to move on to various gaps.
There's
not the Sawalki gap, but the budget gap. I refuse to call it a hole.
Good. The budget deficit and the fiscal gap have come up into the political sphere this week. It seems like every election campaign there is this horrible debate that goes on. People point at each other. Fiscal gap. And we had Stephen Joyce have a crack at it during the 2017 campaign. It was a crucial moment when that
The
failed.
11 billion. The 11
Yeah,
billion
yeah,
role.
yeah. That failed to resonate. So we're seeing it again this time. Winston Peters just popped up and 20 million. We saw a, Nicola Willis slightly uncomfortable Parliament with her accidental joke, but still saying fairly angry and extraordinary things about our fiscal situation. How do you think Labor is going to approach? On September the 12th, we've got the pre-election fiscal update, sets the ground rules, and the politics of it quite difficult now. The whole mood is about let's tighten our belts, let's spend less, let's worry about inflation, and I wonder if this gets traction this time.
I think if you remember back to that Stephen Joyce 11 billion hole that's in the 2017 election, it would have got more, it would have caused more of a dent for Labor, I think, if there hadn't been this huge euphoria around this charismatic young woman, as the potential Prime Minister. So what I think the problem is here is rather than going into is it a hole, just accepting that actually it's a problem for Labor now, because there's a kernel of truth there, even if you don't accept this a whole. And the kernel of truth is there was a meeting with the public sector leadership, and we assume to say, cut back. But more importantly, there's a narrative out there that whether it's, these numbers are just extraordinary and preposterous, right? Whether it's, $20 billion hole or a $7 billion deficit or whatever it is, what people see is a government that hasn't spent the money that it's got well. That's the narrative that I think has stuck for Labor. It's going to be even if because people aren't going to pay attention to the numbers, right? They're just going to go, there's a hole. And, Labor's being accused of not spending the money, or, getting into debt and not spending the money properly. And that's the problem for them. That, when you look at, we talked about light rail, you look at Lake Onslow, you look at the 1.9 billion for mental health, and people are going, where's it gone? How's it been spent? So it all bleeds in politically. The narrative just kind of consolidates around this idea that they're not good managers of money. And the money they have spent, they've spent badly, and then they've overspent, which may be completely unfair. I mean, it was $23 billion deficit during COVID, during 2019.
And that money
legitimate. Yeah.
But it went to large and small businesses who put it in the bank as cash. And that's the sort of great irony here. You're right, that's the narrative that's out there. It's very hard to change people's minds once it's been planted. But I've had a go in a piece today at unraveling some of those numbers and pointing out actually that on the very day that Nicola Willis was accusing the government of being fiscally irresponsible and having lost control of the fiscal situation, we had fund managers bidding more than 2 times the amount of bonds on offer and paying just 4.8% for it when inflation's 6%. So essentially,
and we're AAA rated when the United States has just been AA minus rated, right?
Yes. So
AA plus. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So this, which it frustrates me, I suppose, and I am keen to push back against it. This obvious narrative that of course National are better running the economy and running the government's accounts than Labor, when actually the track record shows that Labor is the one that's reduced the deficits the most, and Labor is the one with a higher growth rate across
which
the
is
various...
weirdly the same with the Democrats and the Republicans in the United States.
Exactly.
And to some extent or lesser extent the Conservatives, and it's weird.
But the problem is people don't look at the numbers. They go, how do I feel? And I feel poorer than I did a few years ago, let alone before COVID, but during COVID. And you look at, we are in a weaker economy than we thought we're going to be at this stage. It is zero, we're looking at 0% growth. None of that is particularly good. It may not be, not saying it's the government's fault, but the point is people don't feel that their lives are good or that they're doing okay financially.
Josie, may I ask a media question about that? Because again, we had a friend of mine on recently to talk about solutions journalism, and Bernard, that thing that you just described about people not feeling, Is that contributed to by an unintelligent approach to reporting? To if you think about where we are in interest rates and growth in New Zealand at the moment, Adrian Orr would appear to have gone down the right path relative to, say, the UK. Just are we not sophisticated enough in reading this and reporting this?
I think that implies, though, Peter, that people are sort of taken in by I mean, I believe this about disinformation and that they're taken in by a misreading of somebody reporting something badly or whatever. I don't agree that people are that stupid. I think they're basically going, I don't feel very well off, and I don't feel that my wages, even if wages have gone up, it doesn't feel like they've gone up sufficiently for inflation. So I don't think that there's I don't think it's the problem of media kind of misrepresenting it. I think the economy is weaker than we thought it would be at this stage. None of the signs look particularly good. I mean, we are in a technical recession. Actually, America has been remarkable in the sense that unemployment hasn't ballooned, its interest rates are going down, and so on. I mean, the good news is that we will know exactly what the situation is when the pre-FU comes out, right? The pre-election economic fiscal update before the election. So no new government is going to be able to go in and go, oh, it's much worse. The hole is even bigger than we thought. They're not going to be able to do that because we will have a very clear idea. My only worry about Treasury's report is it'll be full of things like circular economy and well-being, and that we'll have no idea what they're talking about. It'll be a massive hole and it'll be a donut hole. And we won't see what's happening. But we will, hopefully.
But donuts are bloody delicious, despite having a hole in the middle. Now, Josie, one of our very active participants on the YouTube chat, Francis, is asking that we make sure that we do in fact address this question that Luxon was asked this week about China and investing in roads. Now, what do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, my view about that. So we did this debate last night, and I actually asked Jerry Brownlee, because Brooke Van Velden was there from ACT, Jerry Brownlee from National. Clearly, this is a big differentiation for them, right? So it's true that the National Party here, our centre-right party, is a lot less hawkish on China than the Tory party in the UK or other centre-right parties around the world, which is really interesting. And ACT are being much more muscular about it, right? They do not want Chinese, they don't want to be dependent financially on China. I mean, if you look at it independently, you go, what is the difference really of us? I mean, we sell bonds, government bonds, and China buys them. I mean, the other, we don't say you can't buy our government bonds. So I'm not, if you're doing a PPP, public-private partnership, I'm not sure that if the due diligence stacks up, why we wouldn't take money from China whereas we would from the US or the UK.
Well, it is called the Belt and Road Project.
Yeah, they do build roads.
And then they belt you when you don't pay the money.
But I think it was and Jerry Brownlee last night just kind of snapped it down and said, look, this is a nonsense debate. It was a throwaway line, maybe another of Luxon's throwaway lines, like, let's all go have babies, that becomes a story that they didn't really intend it to be. But there is certainly a political difference there between National and ACT.
Yeah, and I think that the other members of Five Eyes are worried about how loose and open the National Party in New Zealand, unlike the Conservative Party in the Five Eyes, is to Chinese investment, Chinese involvement in the economy, connections with China, when it's very clear now that Chinese influence campaigns have been active in New Zealand and other places like Canada. Trudeau looks like he's going to lose the next election based on the scandals around it. And this approach from Luxon is going to be out of line with our partners, apart from other Conservative parties, and he'll have to be pushed back into his box if he's in government.
Yeah, but Bernard, we are trying really hard, and again, this came up in the debate last night. And there was quite good cross-party consensus around this. We're trying very hard to have an independent foreign policy, and we are not at war with China. We don't intend to go to war with China. They are our friend. We're a critical friend of China, but they are our friend, and we have we have called them out on human rights issues. We've called them out on treatment of Uyghurs, but they are a trading partner, and we have no intention of suddenly treating them as if they're not a friend that we do business with, even if we're a critical friend. And I think we have to be really careful about it, because if the worst thing that could happen right now, and listening to Robert was really interesting. I don't think we're going to war, but it feels like there's a lot of war games going on. And New Zealand was part of one in Australia just this week. We're 11 countries, the biggest joint military training operation ever. But the biggest risk is that an accident happens. The Archduke turns up and gets shot, and then we're suddenly at war. Like the First World War, and you kind of go, well, even if that's the worst case scenario, if that happens, we're still not going to pick, Ottoman Empire over the Austro-Hungarian Empire. We're still going to try and forge some kind of independent foreign policy, defense policy, trade policy, and so on. It's really difficult. But the idea that we would suddenly shut down
we had a former trainer of Chinese spies at the head of the Foreign Affairs and Select Committee who resigned quietly, and the National Party have never had a reckoning of what's happening there, or the amount of money that comes from United Front parties through not just the National Party, they used to come through the Labour as well, that in every deemed to be some pretty aggressive influence campaigning.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Yeah.
And when you look at how these Belt and Road projects have worked out in other countries, Sri Lanka had to hand the port over to the Chinese military after they defaulted on the payments, and I think given the growing role of Five Eyes in how we operate in the world and the way that Xi Jinping is throwing his weight around, I think at some point we're going to have to choose, and I choose the West.
That's interesting. So I think then, just to push back on that a bit, though, if you look at the Pacific,
you do before I do, Josie. But go ahead.
Our Pacific partners, our whanonga, our extended family in the Pacific, are saying, "Hey, actually, we might be better at navigating this than you guys. We need your help with some of the stuff you just mentioned." Terms of indebtedness and influence, but rather than going, you've got to get China out of the Pacific, we need to look at ourselves and go, so what is the Pacific asking us to do that we're not doing that they're getting China? It's access to markets. If you're PNG, you can get visa-free entry into China if you're from Papua New Guinea. So they're getting access to markets, they're getting labour mobility, and they're getting money, and they're being able to make their own decisions about what they spend the money on. Then they're getting into huge debt. But our reaction to that should be, what can we offer that's better than what China's offering?
Completely. And for example, we should have a Schengen free movement of labour region across the South Pacific.
Well, we're just about to have it between New Zealand and Australia, aren't we?
But it should include Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, New Caledonia, and also the Solomon Islands. All the employers in Australia, New Zealand, and so would those families in Pacific. Sure, there'd be a lot back and forth, but the money that gets sent back to the islands and then used to build schools and doctors' clinics and those sorts of things.
We're just not very imaginative about some of this, are we?
No.
Yeah.
Josie, would you and Raf Manji please form a party, and you could be dictators, charming dictators. It'd be fine now with Bernard.
Roll over Eva Peron. I'm on my way.
And on that note, Josie, thank you very much
Well
for
put.
being with us. It's like on again, and great to see you, and we hope we can have you back again next week. Peter,
See you, Josie.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers. A skateboarding dog? Do you have
Well,
one?
I do have a skateboarding dog, but also we wanted to talk about the Suwalki Gap. We can talk about that another time. Suwalki Gap is between Poland, Latvia, and Kaliningrad.
Oh, yeah.
And it's this idea that the Russians might connect it up. We've talked about it before. Expect to hear more about the Suwalki Gap, which is nothing to do with Gap, the fashion shop. So, I did have a little one. It's a sort of punny one, Bernard, which is a nice little story about what I consider to be a police sting operation, which is that some thief in Wales has stolen 14 beehives.
That sounds painful.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
mean,
I look forward to the police going into that.
that's,
You missed the sting. You missed my pun. All right.
I'm hopeless.
Jesus Christ.
No,
Yeah.
have a great weekend, everyone.
And I'll see you shortly, Bernard, up the road, right?
Fish and chips, yeah, no. it'll
Yeah.
be good.
Well, we don't shh. You don't want to say that because all of our listeners in Herne Bay, there'll be bloody the paparazzi will be there, or the chipperazzi in this case.
The chipper. Thank you very much, everyone. Catch you later. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.